What's up, bucko? It's your boy, Jack Slack, coming at you on Thursday the 2nd of whatever the 8th month is. And it's the Fights Gone By podcast episode 93. It'll be a little bit of an informal one today because I'm about to head off travelling. Got to disappear into the Japanese mountains to practice my kata for a week or so again. So I will be I'll be writing, but I won't be podcasting for a few days. Just to get that out of the way before people go, where's my Fights Gone By? So that's what's going to be happening. But we got loads of news, well, a little bit of news. We got loads of recaps, a few questions, and then a pay-per-view card coming up this weekend, which I anticipate to be doing around the 200,000 buy mark. I don't know if we're going to break that glass floor ever again, unless we headline with Nico versus Valentina or something like that. But in terms of news, some interesting stuff coming out of KSW this week. Massive Polish fight company, famous for freak fights with Popek Monster and Mariusz Pudzianowski, world's roidiest man. But they also have good talent, as I covered extensively when the Narkun versus Khalidov fight was coming up. Mamed Khalidov, one of the best middleweights outside the UFC, used to be pretty clear-cut, but now Gegard Mousasi's left too. Has been KSW's middleweight champion for a long old time, went up to light heavyweight to challenge their light heavyweight champion, knocked him down a couple of times, or at least had him wobbled, can't remember the exact details, but basically kicked his ass until I think the third round, when Narkun finally caught him in a triangle. But Khalidov's basically said he wants the rematch, and he can't fight as much as he used to when he was younger, so he's going to vacate his middleweight belt to do it, which is a really cool thing to do, because most people, especially in this day and age of simultaneous champions, would wait until they get the light heavyweight belt before they dropped the middleweight one. Tease that you might defend the original one, but never actually do. But to the point, KSW said that they're going to be doing a 4-man tournament to decide their new middleweight champion. I don't know a lot of KSW's middleweights, but that is a fun way to do it. I doubt it'll be a one-night tournament, but with a 4-man tournament, you could pull it off if you made one. Well, actually, you know, if they do it in Poland or somewhere in Europe, it doesn't matter. They can do a one-night tournament all they want. Which is one of the nice upsides of not having fights based in the US. The downsides, of course, are that you're not appealing to the pay-per-view market. But then, if you're the second-rate, second best fight company or a B-tier promotion, doesn't really matter. Other news out there: Aldridge versus Duplessis rematch, because the first fight was really good and people are really hot on both those guys. Then news that doesn't really affect most of my listenership, because I know that almost all of you are American, but BT Sports is losing the rights to the UFC at the end of the year in the UK, which means that they're back up for sale, and rather than some big player getting them, a company called 11 Sports has won them, and 11 Sports don't actually have a channel at the moment. They are an online streaming service, but they announced that they are going to get a TV channel, and it will be available if you've got Sky or Virgin, I believe. We'll see, because they're also claiming that they're going to show most of the pay-per-views, but maybe not the big ones like Conor. That was their example. They used McGregor as an example, but I would be really unsurprised if they just rolled that back and suddenly, Amanda Nunes headlined pay-per-view was a big one, and you didn't get that included with your deal. You had to pay more. But then, that's really the whole thing about fighting, or the UFC rather, generally. It's a pay-per-view sport aimed at the pay-per-view market. If they come to Europe and do other things, that's mainly just to get tickets at the gate. That's why they give us worse cards. It's very hard to sell pay-per-views on American time to people in England when it's going to be 5 a.m. by the time the fight comes around. I cover the sport for a living, and I still catch up the next day. And then, of course, there's all talk about Conor McGregor coming back to fight Khabib. They're now saying Las Vegas, because obviously not Russia. And the UFC rankings have suddenly slotted McGregor back in at number 1 in the lightweight rankings, despite being 2-1 at lightweight against world-class lightweights, and also having not fought in a year. What a silly, silly business. So let's talk about the fight night card that happened over the weekend, and the lineup on that card, parts of it were, well, the main and co-main were stronger than the main and co-main for this pay-per-view, because weird rematch between TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt, and then fight no one cares about between Demetrius Johnson and Henry Cejudo. But this fight night card, you had Aldo versus Stevens in the co-main, but felt like the main. Pouria versus Alvarez in the main, and then Viana and Jacek in the co-main. But they threw in Tecia Torres to offset that. Tecia Torres is an incredibly boring fighter, and somehow managed to be even more boring while getting her ass kicked, which is a feat. And then even in the moments of success that she had, she chinned her. It was either the end of round 1 or the end of round 2, cracks her with a right hand in a trade, and then immediately dives into the clinch and starts hammer fisting her thigh. And it's just, what the fuck is this? Did you learn to strike from Cheikh Congo? Hammer fisting someone in the thigh should be illegal just because it's so humiliating to show someone who's never seen MMA before. Why is that person trying to jerk off that dude's hamstring? So yeah, that fight was as mediocre as expected, but Viana returned, did her jabby, did her movie, did her stop the takedowns, came out afterwards and said weird shit about Rose not actually being the champion, because of course she did. And of course, it's hard to build up to that rematch because you've already done 2, which is the problem that they're going to have with Cody Garbrandt versus TJ Dillashaw, but we'll get round to that. Pouria versus Alvarez was a good enough fight. Both the fights were good enough fights. They were pretty entertaining fights, and they were marred by just random shit. Even if you're on one person's side or another, and you've got to be really careful, because I was talking about 12-6 elbows just being dreadful anyway, because I was pissed off about Emil Meek being allowed to elbow his guy in the back of the head a dozen times last week, and people were just like, well, he also wet-willied him, and I was like, I'm not talking about that fight, I'm talking about 12-6 elbows in general, you angry Dustin Poirier fan. But both of these fights have been just marred by some weird strangeness. I'm not saying let's have a rematch, but I'm just saying how odd. In the same way that, Weidman versus Silva, both those fights were a little bit odd. But I thought the opening stand-up stuff looked good. Alvarez was using his slight height advantage and exaggerating it with his crouch and his long stance and his moving in and out, and he was getting into the body really well, which was a great idea. He did do some overextending stuff. You'll see him throw the double, triple right hand, just standing still and taking jabs at the same time. Poirier's jab looked good. Poirier's lead left straight looked good. And I really like Poirier's counter right hook. It wasn't a big booming punch. It was just something that he could clip Eddie with, because Eddie was getting in close to the dig to the body and then not moving his head or keeping his hands up as well as he perhaps needed to there. Good to see Eddie throw a couple of kicks. Obviously, would have loved to see him do that more over a longer fight, but that didn't happen. How did they get to the guillotine? I can't even remember how they got to the guillotine, but there was a guillotine attempt, and Alvarez held himself up on the fence, which pissed off a lot of people. But, even if you could grab it or you could rest your hand on it. You probably could have kept yourself up resting your hand on it. But then he did wet willy Dustin, put his finger in his ear. And then they got to the leg mount on the fence. And the leg mounts it was sort of a mount rather than a leg mount, but Pouria was sitting up with his back to the fence. So rather than having a flattened out opponent where they're just dead if you're mounted and good, they're up against the fence and you're sort of sitting on top of them. But if you let your weight off at any moment, they could just get up, and you can't really hit them effectively because their head's against your chest. So it's a weird sort of position, and it's closely related to the sort of leg mount, which is where you if you've got someone and they're crawling up along the fence and you hook your leg behind their calves, your calf behind their calves, and you triangle your legs and you try and sort of extend their legs out so that they can't get up. The position we call laming it out. Jake Shields, Jason Miller, Josh Thompson, Johnny Hendricks all used it to just stop the opponent getting up and didn't actually cause any damage off it. There's a couple of guys who can do some interesting stuff off it. Habib uppercuts off it. He'll get his head below the opponent's and then throw uppercuts while posting on their shoulder with the seat grip or thumb post, I think John Danaher calls it. On the subject of John Danaher, I've been watching the back DVDs, and it annoys me because, he's a great teacher, but he is a very wordy man. If you've ever read a John Danaher Instagram post, everyone's Mr. So-and-so, my student, he's a kohai, a senpai. He's a bit of a weeb, John Danaher. But prior to filming this DVD, at no point in the DVD does anyone correct John Danaher on the word proprioception. Proprioception is where you know where something is on your body without looking. So you how you can touch your nose with your finger, or you can touch your knee without looking at it. And he talks about that in the DVD, and he keeps saying prior perception. and it really hacked me off. So I had to Google it. It is not a phrase that's used in any context to do with, proprioception. And no one at any point stepped in and said, John, you're getting the word wrong. You're a BJJ coaching great, but you're getting the word wrong. So that hacked me off. Anyway, so leg mount we were talking about. And Alvarez is basically probably more full mount, to be honest, except Dustin's hips are sort of straight back against the fence. Isn't really able to do anything. He's like trying to make distance to land something, but all the angles are a bit odd. You can't really get good blows in from there. And Mark Henry mimes the downward elbow, calls for the downward elbow, mimes the downward elbow again. Eddie looks at him, takes a second, does the downward elbow, looks back at him, looks at the ref, and then Mark Goddard says, no, you can't downward elbow. Just, on the one hand, this rule is stupid, which we will talk about extensively. On the other hand, if you are a coach at a top-class gym with, two former lightweight champions, two guys who are constantly in title contention, Edson Barbosa, Marlon Moraes, he's in title contention now, Zabit Magomed Sharapov, whichever. You've got good guys there. You're fighting at the highest levels of MMA. You know that that's in the rule book. It's called by name, the 12-6 elbow. As much as the referees try to ignore it, they do. They actively try to ignore the rule, and everyone agrees that the rule is fairly stupid. You can't be surprised when if you call for a technique that's specifically outlawed in the rules, and then that you get punished for it. So why would you call for it? But Mark Henry is just a strange character, and we said this last week. Mark Henry says a lot of things. And then I found out this week that Zabit has a younger brother who's 17, and Ariel was tweeting just gushing praise over what he'd heard about him. And I was like, I can't wait for Mark Henry to tell me that he's going to be a world champion and then beat Mayweather in a boxing match. Just incredible that both the fighter and the corner fucked up so badly there. I mean, obviously, it wasn't hurting Pouria. He wasn't in danger of horrible injury. He even said to the ref, no, he hit me in the shoulder. But that specific angle is banned. And then I went back and just said, I was going through famous 12-6 elbows, like the ones that Yoel Romero landed on the body of Derek Brunson. And I don't mind people being like, well, that ref didn't call it. He obviously thought that they were legal. He thought that you could 12-6 elbow to the body, like some refs have brain farts about stomping the body. But no, people try and pretend that all referees are actually in agreement, and that all referees saw that was a different angle. There's a load of bollocks about hand being above the elbow and then dropping it, or hand being behind the head and then bringing it down on an arc. Your shoulder joint is a hinge or a pivot in the movement, and your femur, or not your femur, sorry, your fucking upper arm bone, whatever that is a straight line. Like, your elbow is always going to move on an arc if you're throwing a downward elbow. The rule specifically says, and there is like a load of bollocks after this in the official manual, which basically makes the original rule pointless, but the wording of the rule in brief and the headline of the rule and what the only bit of the rule that they put on the UFC website and show on the broadcasts is downward strikes with the point of the elbow. And those Yoel Romero ones on Derek Brunson were absolutely that. And you can say, like, oh, well, allow it if they're leaning slightly forward or leaning slightly backwards or whatever. But the whole point of the rule seems to be to stop people elbowing down on the back of the head and the spine when being taken down. The whole point of the rule is to, stop people doing that, elbowing people in the brainstem. And then by allowing this sort of lean out stuff, dudes are going to throw 4 or 5 in a row fast. If you watch Travis Brown's ones, people were like, oh, well, he did change the angle, but at least one in each of those knockouts landed square on the brainstem of Josh Barnett or Gabriel Gonzaga. And the other night, Emil Meek was allowed to just elbow the back of the head with impunity because the referee was like, oh, but he is on an angle. It's a fucking stupid rule, and they just need to outlaw all. I'd be happy with them not allowing the elbows to the side of the head and the slightly leaning ones if it just made it clearer what is illegal. Make more of it illegal, and then you can actually call the fucking rule rather than having this weird grey area. But anyway, it didn't matter because Dustin Poirier then came back, knocked him out on the feet. Knocked him down did knock him out on the feet. But yeah, it was a good showing out of Poirier. Parts of it were a good showing out of Alvarez. You got the feeling that it would have been a really good fight if it also continued, but you can't blame especially as he wasn't doing anything. The whole thing about the position he was in was that he couldn't find anything to do. You can't then claim that he lost the fight because he lost the position, because he wasn't doing anything for the position. It was do something weird like that and get stood up because it was illegal, or stay there and get stood up, or move and Pouria probably gets up because he's already got his back to the fence and his feet under him, or almost under him as soon as you start moving. So a rough one for Eddie Alvarez, especially with it being the last fight on his contract. I think he should go to Bellator, just get some easy wins, easy money, and maybe change camp, because that is insane that Mark Henry called for a downward elbow in the middle of a fight. And mimed it too, which is even better. Ross Pearson and John McDacey had a good little banger. McDacey hooked with a hooker, that's pretty impressive. He was really taking advantage of Ross Pearson's sort of struggles in closing the distance. You saw that against Dan Hooker, he's leaping in with left hooks, trying to duck after the left hook and then got kneed during it, but he was also getting jabbed up on the way in. The knockout happened because of that, but it was happening loads before that too. Obviously, hook with a hooker, low kick with a low kicker, all that stuff. There are... Well, I don't believe in the low kick for a low kicker. That was some hilarious Bellator shill on Reddit. There are rules of thumb are there because there are exceptions to them. And McDacey was drawing him out nicely and landing good hooks and kicking well. And it was a good old fight, actually. It's been a little while, so I've forgotten most of it. But let's talk about the real main event. Aldo versus Stevens. This was... if you haven't read my article, go read it. It's been called the greatest Jack Slack article ever written. Someone said I was channeling the spirit of F. Scott Fitzgerald, and I said, yeah, I would bang Christina Ricci. I've been saying that since the Addams Family. Chomo's choice. Yeah, this fight was absolutely brilliant. It was a very emotional fight. And it also, writing about this fight, people do like to overcomplicate stuff, and that would be very easy for me as someone writing about technical stuff to exploit and just be like, yeah, he definitely did this deliberately, and it was all a genius plan, and he was doing maths in his head when he did that, and there was trigonometry going on, and it was like Rain Man or the card counting scene in The Hangover, just diagrams of triangles and shit popping up around his head as he attempted his counters. But the truth is that the turning point of that fight, Aldo throws a right low kick naked. Stevens counters up the centre. Aldo's rolling with it, but does get caught. And I've tried to slow the footage down, and the footage I've got isn't good enough that I can see. And also, he gets caught, but he's rolling with it, and you don't know how badly he's caught. He goes to the fence. He tries to duck in for a clinch, as he did against Holloway so many times. Holloway knew he took breaks, so Holloway dropped his head, shucked out of the clinch. Stevens did exactly the same thing here. So then Aldo goes into a little bit of a panic, covers up along the fence and tries to move his head. Stevens is swarming on him. He lands a couple of grazing blows coming out of that failed clinch, misses a load of uppercuts, lands a big uppercut, and Aldo's answer to it is to swing back. He's head forward being pulled down by Stevens in this weird brawl, but he's just throwing overhand punches and looking at the floor. And at some point in that exchange, Stevens changes his mind about it and starts backing up for the first time in the fight. And I was talking about this in the article, and I was just saying, the goal of fighting generally, or to be a very good fighter, you want to try and take as much fight out of the fight as possible. You don't want it to be a fight, you want it to be like a hunt. If you watch Prince Nazim or Roy Jones or someone like that at their best, fighting opponents who are overmatched, they're barely getting hit. They're just sort of stalking the opponent, looking out for the opportunities, looking for the big punches. And Aldo is, not a huge hitter generally, and not a big finisher. But he has always, one of the reasons he's always been accused of being conservative and a coaster is that he takes long breaks. He engages entirely on his own terms. He never lets the opponent engage if he's not ready for it. And he can sort of coast to decisions. He doesn't take many risks. But the shared attribute of all great fighters, truly great fighters, is that when they have to, they can fight. And Aldo did in this fight. It was great. He just came back fighting, and then suddenly, having been pecking one shot at a time, trying to off-balance Stevens, trying to just sort of break his rhythm as he stepped in, and being quite conservative through the first round, after that exchange, he suddenly starts walking him down. It was like he'd felt the worst of what Stevens can do, and he was like, nah, I can do this now. Walks him down, throwing 1-2s, throwing counter right hands, just in Stevens' face constantly. Stevens says, fuck, better get back into this fight. His face is getting bloodied up. Comes back, throws an uppercut from days behind him in a left hook that misses and almost turns him round. Aldo bounces back in with a body shot and puts him down. Absolutely beautiful stuff. I said it wasn't Aldo at his best, but it was Aldo at his greatest. It was exactly what he needed to do. And Stevens was giving him trouble. Like, you know, there are these people who are like, no, Aldo was in control the entire time, and there's levels to this striking stuff, but no, like, Stevens was walking him down. Stevens was landing good low kicks. Stevens was landing good jabs too. He was jabbing with Jose Aldo. Have I been calling him Jose the whole time? I've meant to say Jose, whichever one is the one that Portuguese people say. But yeah, I thought Stevens actually looked good here. I thought that was the best Stevens, some of the best Stevens had looked. And, you know, he's been knocked out once ever by Eve Edwards, and that was years ago. So Aldo was fighting this unknockoutable brawler, and he gets into a brawl with him and stops him. Absolutely brilliant. And people got really offended when I said that. They were like, well, the body shot wasn't part of the brawl. And I was like, the dynamic of the fight, you bellend. So great fight. Not peak Aldo, but peak emotion for me. Right, let's do a couple of questions, and then we'll riff about the upcoming, UFC 227, and then I'll head off to the airport. A very special email to start this week's mailbag. Dear Jack, today I'm writing you not with a question, but with a complaint. Due to your shameless retweeting of an article claiming a shortage of ninjas in Japan, I find myself in a bad situation. Upon finding out about the ninja vacancies, I did what any man would do and immediately quit my job, sold my house, and spent my savings on the most authentic ninja gear available at katanamart.co.uk, along with a one-way ticket to Japan. Upon arrival, I was informed that there was no ninja shortage and to please stop referring to myself as Sensei Blacksplosive. I am now back in the UK and completely destitute. If not for the kindness of one Mr. David Hay, who set me up with an incredible sporting opportunity, I would be in very dire straits indeed. I expected more of you as a distinguished MMA reporter. If you would like to settle this like men, I would be happy to duel you at my place of residence beneath Cannon Street Bridge. Regards, Johnny. P.S. Do you think John Jones versus DC rematch would go any different at heavyweight? It seems like DC has a lot more power at heavyweight, but then again, what 245-pound man doesn't have power? I'm a shameless DC fan, so I'm curious if there's any path to victory you can see for him at heavyweight or light heavyweight, based on the previous two fights. Thank you, Jonathan. That was the best laugh I've had in a while reading that. And yeah, the John Jones DC stuff, I'm quite interested in that actually, because the difference between Cormier's fairly recent performances, like against Rumble, Gustafsson's not so recent now, but Anderson Silva, 2015 to sort of 2017, even around the time of the Jones rematch, the Jones rematch, he was looking decent on the feet. His leaning into the kick got him in trouble, obviously, but the Özdemir fight and the Miocic fight really sort of showcased a different style of fighting from DC. He wasn't just pursuing the takedown at all costs, and he wasn't, in the fight with Gustafsson and the first fight with Jones. In fact, it happened around the first fight with Jones. He realised that he could uppercut really well from the clinch. So he was failing to get that takedown and taking a single collar tie and trying to hammer in uppercuts. And Jones just started controlling one wrist all the time with both hands. And, he was doing it against Gustafsson too, the hammering in those bus driver uppercuts. But if you noticed against Özdemir and Miocic, he was actually finding his way into that single collar tie in quite clever ways. He was slipping punches and throwing the arm over the back, hoping they'd take an underhook so that he could work with the whizzer, and if they didn't, he'd catch their head on the way out. So it's a nice way of incorporating his wrestling and setting up that collar tie and the uppercut or the right hook or whatever, if he doesn't get his wrestling going. And, if guys take the body lock, he can start pushing their head away and swinging the arm back through to take the underhook. The trouble he had with Jones the first time was that Jones was really denying him the high crotch and making it so that, really controlling one hand whenever he entered the clinch as well. That fight was John Jones shutting down his wrestling and beating him up at range. And the second fight, we didn't really get into wrestling range very much. So I'd be very interested if he could dirty box or set up the chances to dirty box more effectively. That'd be fascinating. And of course, John Jones going up to heavyweight, we don't know how much he'd choose to pack on. 40 extra pounds on Cormier seems to be doing him wonders. Whether Jones would be able to pack on, 40 pounds on what he has, because not all of that is muscle on DC. It's just, he has the dad belly going on. But I don't know how much John Jones would use that heavyweight upper limit, to be honest. I'm not writing it off. They're going to bring John Jones back. He's going to get off once again. So there's always the chance. Who knows? Cheers, Jonathan. Oh, here we go. Here's one that links into the preview of the next fight anyway. So, hey, mate, greetings from New Zealand. All right, hold on. Hi, mate. No, can't do it. I'm David Farrier, and I'm a dark tourist. It was pretty close, admit it. Hey, mate, greetings from New Zealand. Just had a question for the Daddy Mac of Mixed Martial Arts Attack. I am anxiously anticipating TJ Cody 2, and was wondering what you think the best response to the Bang Muay Thai system and the style TJ employs in general, brackets constant stance switching, lots of feints, level changes, using footwork to angle off to the outside, and firing offense from unconventional angles. I know there are some weapons like leg kicks, which take away the speed of your stance switches, and trying to hit them on the switch when their base isn't under them, but how can Cody deal with the feints in particular? Does he disregard them knowing that they are likely to be feints, thereby playing into TJ's offense? Do you try and counter with pocket boxing, like how he dropped him in the first fight? Try coming forward and apply pressure to make it harder for TJ to set up his own rhythm and distance. Thanks very much. I'm looking forward to any future breakdowns of our recent high-flying Kiwis. Your boys and mine, Adesanya and Hooker. Cheers, Callum. Yeah, let's talk about this fight then. So, one of the things Dillashaw did well in the first fight was kicking naked. You know, he was making use of having weapons that he was willing to use at that extended range that Cody did not. Cody can kick, but very rarely does. You know, he's really reliant on his hands and the cartwheel kick occasionally. But like, that's not really, you don't cartwheel kick often enough that you can just do it as a counter to anyone's regular kicking game. And I think the kicking was one of the main differences between Dillashaw and Cruz in that regard. What Garbrandt did against Cruz would work against the same stuff that TJ does. Against Cruz, that stance switching and marching makes you very vulnerable when you're between them, and if you can get caught in overextending, especially, when you're extending and you fight from one stance, that's pretty bad. But when you're overextending and you're fighting from both stances and you're happy to march, you are taking an extra step. You're going to go, okay, cool, I'll just keep chasing. And Cruz got caught a lot by that. The times he got knocked down, he was sort of marching towards Garbrandt and didn't expect Garbrandt to stop and be there. I think drawing TJ out and drawing TJ into overextension is a very powerful tool if Garbrandt can do it. I'll be talking about this extensively in an article. I think I'm writing one for Unibet this week, so that'll be interesting. But regardless of which stance TJ comes in on, he tends to one of the things TJ likes is to dart in and past the opponent, and it helps if they're coming towards him to do that. You can make a neater angle, like Barao sort of slowly advancing to him the entire time. If you shoot, say I'm orthodox, I throw the right hand, I dart out, I end up in a southpaw stance facing him from his right side, so I'm off to my left of him, and then he turns to face me and I hit him again. That's really neat, but if he moves backwards when I try and do my dart, I'm not going to be able to get to him on the second punch, so I just have to sort of okay, that was a wasted movement, I'll start over. One of the things that could really help Cody is retreating on that 45 or, a rough angle, as if he was trying to set up an open side counter, but regardless of which stance TJ's on, and then hoping to draw him out into overextension. If he gets tired of darting and missing and not being close enough for his second attack, he might be tempted to come in when he shouldn't. And that's when the weapons like the left hook, which Cody has a wicked left hook, can start to be brought to lever. Of course, in the first match, I'm still in the process of studying it again, but I seem to recall that it was he sort of stood his ground as TJ was coming in and tried to left hook him from there. And he, it was a sort of crapshoot. It was one of those Dan Hardy, Carlos Condit ones where either man could have got caught. But I feel like rather than standing there and hoping to win a trade of left hooks, he should be drawing TJ onto his left hook. Or right hand, whatever's available, but I think the left hook works. If you can convince someone to run onto you and then stop, and you get them far too close, the left hook is the best weapon for that sort of exchange. The left hook is like being able to funk in wrestling. People being like, how does he win every scramble? They're supposed to be random, or 50-50. And the left hook sort of makes it like that for scramble exchanges on the feet. I think for Cody, I'd say kick more. And of course, there's obviously multiple approaches to that. One way is to draw TJ out and make him use the footwork too much, make him overreach, make him jump in and then just be there one time. The same thing, sort of thing that Machida did. The back away, and then suddenly when they're really overcommitting to get to you, you haven't moved at all and you're just there to hook them, or you let them fall short and hook them. The other way is to use the fence, get TJ towards the fence, apply some pressure, and try and cut down his options. If you get his back to the fence and you stand fairly close to him, if he darts either way, he's really staying in the path of a hook the entire time. And of course, that overextension stuff, if you can draw him out and then when he's just sort of retracting into his stance or not following up, give him a good kick in the calf or the shin, that sort of stuff will slow him down too. I think I'd be interested to see if Cody can use a jab to sort of get in behind it, use the jab and duck in behind it so that he's drawing out counters and then trying to move in on TJ. But I think one of the things TJ is very good at is that, as we were talking about earlier, he just doesn't engage if he doesn't want to. If you want to go to him, that's a lot of work, whereas he's just sort of floating around the edge of you the entire time, going, shall I? Nah. It's interesting, but Friday I will have an article going up. Keep an eye on the old Twitter feed or whatever, and I should have a nice long piece going up about that. Oh, another question about TJ versus Cody. This is a hot fight, apparently. Hey, Jack. In the first fight, Cody repeatedly made TJ miss with the teeps. TJ then often touched down with his feet extremely close, almost crossed. I believe in one instance this offered the angle for Cody's knockdown. I'm going to have to watch this again. I'm not going to take your word for it. Am I missing something, or are these missed teeps the perfect trigger for a signature Garbrandt blitz? He seems to prefer countering low kicks, perhaps because he is a shorter puncher. Best from Nico. I do recall several front kicks being parried or missing in that fight. I think for TJ, probably Bang's seen it in the footage, but if you've seen that in the footage, that's a really good time to be bringing out the spinning back fist. Great example of that, Carey versus Tiger. I think it was their second fight. In the first fight, or the first round of the second fight, I can't remember which, but Carey is constantly... In fact, Takero's trained with TJ, and TJ cheap shotted him. We all remember this. But Takero loves that lead leg step up front kick, and he falls in behind it to make his trades. He's an infighter, but he has that long kick that he uses to get there. But Tiger was able to parry it and come back, and I can't remember what he cracked him with, but it was a good punch, having parried the kick across himself. And then the next time he parried it across himself, he jumped into punch again, but Takeru span into the back fist and knocked him out. It was a gorgeous knockout. I think it was a knockout, might have been a knockdown, hold on. Yeah, that was really early in the third round. He just chucked that kick out and then span and knocked him out. Actually, that was their first fight, not their second fight, my bad. But the nice thing about that is, of course, it's really just making it hard for the opponent to close in. Maybe the first time you'll either take their head off or come close to it and they'll go, shit, better not jump in again after those teeps. But it's both a deterrent and the first time it's a trap, the second time it's a deterrent and will keep them from jumping in on you when that happens. I will be very interested to see what kind of adjustments they make in this fight, both men, because even if you're TJ Dillashaw and you won that fight, you and your coaches watching it can't be happy that one, you were dropped, two, the last punch that knocked Garbrandt down could have easily been Garbrandt knocking Garbrandt knocking TJ down. They both had their right hand low, their left hook coming in, and TJ just about beat him to the punch. Right, let's do a quick look at this card before we get out of here this week. Marlon Vera versus Luigi Buren, the number 220th featherweight in the world. Yep, whatever. I like Marlon Vera because he's a gangly looking dude and he wears ankle sleeves, which is cool enough for me. Danielle Taylor versus Weili Zhang, who's the number one woman in China, apparently, at strawweight. Fun enough. Jose Torres, coming off that almost disastrous first fight with the weird-ass knockout by being slammed against Alex Perez. Like it. Shaman Marias versus Matt Sales. Okay. Kyung Ho Kang, Ricardo Ramos. I thought that was Ricardo Lamas, but a racist Chinese caricature. Ricky Simon, Montel Jackson. Jesus, there's not... Yeah, like this early card is really not a lot of names to draw in the people who watch the prelims. Then you got Pedro Munoz versus Brett Johns, which is a really good fight. Love that. Brett Johns, funky grappler, really good fun to watch. Has a go of it on the feet, but isn't quite as skilled there yet. Pedro Munoz, the slowest man in the bantamweight division. He is the bantamweight for people who say that bantamweights are too fast and you can't focus on what's going on. The fight with John Dodson was absolutely painful because he just kept letting John Dodson do the same thing over and over again. But he does have a wicked guillotine, so there's always that. He should just adopt Verdum tactics, like seem like he's getting knocked down and then try and snap up a guillotine when they jump on him. Sorry, I yawned there. I was reading Pollyana Viana versus JJ Aldridge up there above this. But then you're hitting the main card. You've got Thiago Santos, number 15 middleweight in the world, according to Tapology. Fun fucking fighter. Has a win over number 5 ranked light heavyweight, Anthony Smith. But he's fighting Kevin Holland, who Tapology ranks as the number 112th middleweight in the world. Interesting that Holland got a finish in Bellator and then went to Dana White's Contender Series and won a decision there. Obviously, Bellator didn't offer him what he wanted or something like that, but I'm not seeing an opponent drop out here for Thiago Santos, so I have no idea what's going on with this fight. It seems like a mismatch and a silly thing to do, but, whatever. Pollyana Viana versus JJ Aldridge. Those could be made-up names. I have no idea who these people are. Number 30th strawweight in the world in a division you didn't know there were 30 people fighting in. Cub Swanson versus Renato Carneiro or Renato Moicano. That is a good fight. Swanson's getting a little bit long in the tooth now, and he is a little bit wild on the feet. Moicano, very good at lancing people up with straight punches, pounding them with low kicks, and circling off the entire time. So if he's got a bit of height and reach on Swanson, which I believe he has, that could be a rough night for Swanson. But, that would be Swanson's big turnaround. If he could beat Moicano, then yeah, fair enough. Move him towards title contention, even though he just lost to Frankie a little while ago. And then Cejudo versus Johnson, which we don't really care about. Unless Cejudo wins, and then that'll breathe some life into that husk of a division. Anyway, I reckon that'll do us for this week. I'm off on my travels, and I'll be back. I should be able to do a podcast later in next week. If you want to support the podcast and get in on the history episodes, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to know what I'm up to at any time, check out thefightprimer.com. Keep an eye out for that Unibet piece on Friday. And I'll catch you all next week. Cheers.